Hi everybody, so today I'm presenting you the topic knowledge loss in the publication process, looking at over 3 million references. So to explain what I'm trying to do here, I'll just start by directly providing an example. So we have here a paper by Dulek et al., Tax Compliance and Psychic Costs, Behavioral Experimental Evidence Using a Physiological Marker. And on the left-hand side, you can see its working paper version back then when it was Cube in 2012. And on the right-hand side, the journal article version published in the Journal of Public Economics. And here just a snippet of the reference list for both articles. And what I would like you to notice here is that this reference by Bianchi et al., published in 1993 in IEEE Biomedical Engineering, is not to be found anymore in the journal article version. So the same way as it happens with this journal article, it happens across many other different articles. I'm not sure if you have noticed that sometimes when looking at working paper references versus the journal article. And why is this at all an interesting topic to look at? So, well, references are footprints of the creative path of researchers. It shows, well, what sort of literature, what sort of inspiration the authors got to pursue their research. And well, in the publication process, we as researchers, we have to go through reviewers, editors, and well, we sometimes need to do changes in our papers, and sometimes, in particular for early career researchers, even if you don't really agree with these changes, you often just sometimes prefer to comply, because not doing so in a way is jeopardizing your career goals too. And well, what's the issue with this? The disappearance of these references prevents us then from recognizing all of the authors or all of that really help shape this creative path. And this has real consequences in science too, because citations, as we know, are also relevant in choosing which type of research gets what funding. So it has real consequences. And back even to today's morning presentation from Yolanda, not only income inequalities and rights, but also citation inequalities and rights. So it's worth to look at what's happening behind the scenes a bit more closely. And so, what do I actually want to do here? Well, I want to look at, is this, well, just a random process? Of course, in the review process, it is to be expected that some references would be lost, other would be added. But is there maybe a systematic bias in this process? For example, references from less prestigious journals or from distant disciplines less likely to survive in the publication process? Do authors' characteristics matter too? Also, which authors are more likely to get their reference list altered? These are the type of questions I want to look. So, how do I plan to do this? With the following data, I'll look at research papers in economics, REPEC, in short, which has over 800,000 working papers from over 5,000 different repositories, including well-known ones like NBER. And over 160,000 of these working papers have been published also as journal articles, giving us the opportunity to look at both versions again, as just done at the very beginning. And of these, 140,000 can be downloaded from REPEC. So what I've done is download these files, transform them into Word documents, and then use a Python script to extract the references. And so far, we have managed to extract over 3 million of these references. And well, once we have the references, then the next question is, well, how to recognize which of these references get lost. So unfortunately, there is not a structured database that tells you which are the references from the working paper and which are the references to be found in the journal article version. This is something that we need to find ourselves. So the way to do that, we try to attempt to do this, is by taking each reference from the working paper and compare it to each reference of the journal article version and see whether there is a match or not. And when there is a match, this reference doesn't get lost. If we cannot find a match, then this reference becomes a candidate for being a lost reference. So for this, as I said, we just get the reference as a text, and sometimes, in between the way people write down references in the working paper is also a bit different from the way they do it in the journal article version. So it is unlikely to find a one-to-one match. But what we can do instead is calculate the string similarity, which is using the Levenshtein distance with the equation shown on the slides, and then calculate the value. And well, it's not possible to see here precisely, but there is a small concentration of values above 0.8, and this is usually the closer you are to 1, the closer you are to have a match, and these are usually the references that do have a match. For the majority of cases, since I'm comparing each reference with each other possible reference from the other manuscript, then the majority are, of course, not a match. So generally, any value below 0.5 is not a match, and if the maximum score that a reference can get is still below 0.5, then it is a likely candidate of being a lost reference. In addition to this, we have additional selection criteria that I won't go over in detail too much right now, but I think it's important to mention there would be well around over 90 million string similarity evaluations for this project, and of course with that amount of calculations, there is room for error definitely. But what I still expect here is that on the aggregate level, we would still be able to recognize some trends. And also, of course, some of these parameters, I have right now this 0.5 cutoff, but this is also something that can be explored a little bit more with different values, and see whether with different values, different parameters, these results are still robust. So far, what I have been able to find is a total of 143,000 references that get lost in the process, out of a bit more than 1.5 million references that I've been able to match with the published version in Scopus. This is not quite the 3 million I mentioned at the beginning, but it's also a bit of hard work to actually do this manuscript matching by itself. Nonetheless, here we can see this corresponds more or less to 9.1% or almost 10% of the total references getting lost, which is quite a substantial number. Here a little bit more information on the lost references. So roughly a quarter of working papers that I've been able to match lose references. The majority would just be a few references, so no more than 20%, but a few may lose up to 90%. So this is still an ongoing project. There's still things to explore more in detail. So far what I've just managed to do is just do a preliminary analysis on which authors lose references. So I just have here just this regression, and as I say, this is still preliminary, so I wouldn't want to go too much into detail, but for example, the first value, we have the average age of the authors, and we see that there is a negative effect and seems to be more or less robust, but as I said, this might change later. But this, for example, brings us back to the conversation of, for example, early career researchers being the ones that usually have to comply a bit more in the review process, and this leads to the reference loss. But there's still a lot of work to do, and in the next steps include, doing all the working papers, matching, obtain more background information from the authors, analyze the characteristics of these references themselves. The authors that get their reference list altered, but it would of course also be interesting to see for the references themselves. And as I just mentioned before, experiment with different parameters. So yeah, thank you very much.